Okay, let's get started. Um, as I said, this is the NISCA webinar on the impact of Alzheimer's dementia in our community. Um, Alzheimer's affects a lot of people, including some of the people on this webinar, as well as a lot of the kids we deal with in schools. And after a conversation with the education people at Alzheimer's Association, we said, hey, let's do a webinar to get the word out to the school counselors in our in our group. So our presentation today is going to be by the community educator. Her name's Diane Zeller. Um, she's with the Alzheimer's Association on Long Island. Um, and here's a description of what she's going to talk about. And I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to her.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and we can start to talk about the impact of Alzheimer's and dementia in our community. If you have questions as we work through the presentation this afternoon, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and we'll answer any questions at the end unless it's something that you need right now. Bob will be monitoring that chat as well, so he can always ask me to pause and answer a question. I'd be happy to do that. So, as we think about the impact of Alzheimer's and dementia in our community, I just want to share with you why I do this work. Actually a volunteer, and the reason I do it is because my dad had dementia. I just lost him this past November. And I know how much it affected our family, and I'm sure there are many of you who have that same someone in your life who has Alzheimer's or dementia. So we're going to start with a little video just to give you a little understanding of the impact. So that is giving us a summary of kind of how it's affecting people in our nation. And you can just see some of the facts that we just shared on the screen. Over 7 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's, and that means nearly 12 million Americans are providing unpaid care for family members, loved ones who have Alzheimer's or other dementias. And one figure that really struck me is it kills more than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. So it's a lot of people that it is affecting in our society. The Alzheimer's Association really leads the fight against Alzheimer's, but it does even more than that. And here's what I've discovered since volunteering. It provides research, lots of research to find new ways of detecting the disease, reducing our risk, early detection, but it also really provides community support. So during the presentation, I'll share a phone number for you that you can call if you have questions or you need more support in terms of helping someone to deal with the disease. Now, a lot of people ask, Well, you're talking about Alzheimer's. It's called the Alzheimer's Association, but you're also throwing in the word dementia. So what's the difference? And the answer is dementia is a general term for loss of memory and other thinking abilities. And again, you'll see it says on the screen, severe enough to interfere with daily life. Okay, because we all lose a little bit as we age, and that's normal. Just as, you can't, if you're my age and you're in your 60s, you can't run as fast as you did when you're in your 20s, for example, right? Because the body changes as we get older. Same is true with our brains. We lose something as we get older. Dementia is different. It's really loss enough to interfere with daily life. So it's considerable memory loss. Now, dementia is part of that. Sorry, dementia is, oh gosh, now I'm going to confuse you. Dementia is the general term, but Alzheimer's is part of that. So Alzheimer's, vascular, Lewy body, frontotemporal, these are all kinds of dementia. Okay, so dementia is our general term. Now, when we think about it, and I mentioned memory, memory is what we think of first when we think of someone who suffers from Alzheimer's or another dementia. So we may notice that we have a loved one who is repeating him or herself continually. Now, I always like to say for, those of us who are seniors, there still is a senior moment, right? You can forget a little bit. You can forget who you told that to. Did I tell you this? Did I will say to my children, did I tell you this or did I tell your sister that? I forget who I told. But when if I were, for example, sitting with you at lunch and I told you a story, and then a little while later I told you the next story, the same story again, and I repeated myself, that's when we're saying that memory is really interfering. But notice we're also talking about thinking and behavior, right? So it doesn't only affect our memory because it's affecting the brain in general. It is going to interfere with thinking and behavior. And that is because the Alzheimer's or other dementia is actually killing brain cells in the brain, right? And it's progressive. They're going to keep, um, those brain cells are going to keep dying, right? As the disease progresses. In the early stages, it can be very mild, but as time goes on, folks who have the disease will need around the clock care, and the disease is ultimately a fatal disease. Now, how long all this progresses, very individual. I mean, my dad started showing symptoms maybe in his late 70s. He died at the age of 95. So he really his symptoms slowly progressed. He had a younger brother who died in his late 70s, and once he had the disease, it progressed very quickly. So the symptoms can very much change from person to person. The progression can change greatly from person to person. So we talked about kind of what dementia is and what Alzheimer's is and why dementia is the big term, right? Because again, you can have different kinds of dementia. Vascular dementia means that the blood isn't really reaching your brain as well as it should, right? Alzheimer's, we know because there are these protein plaques and tangles in the brain. Ultimately, they lead to very similar kinds of symptoms. And we know that some populations are at higher risk of developing these symptoms. Black Americans are about twice as likely as white Americans to have Alzheimer's or other dementia. They're studying the reasons. We do know that in the Black community, there is a higher incidence of high blood pressure. And again, whatever affects your heart because it's pumping blood to your brain is going to affect your brain. So that's one of the areas that they're studying. There's nothing conclusive yet about why this is. Same with Hispanic Americans, about 1.5 times as likely to have the disease as white Americans. And we know 2/3 of Americans living with Alzheimer's are women. Now, women tend to live longer than men. That's one reason. However, again, it doesn't account for all of the reasons, and it's an area that is still undergoing study. Now, here are some of the signs to look for when you're concerned about yourself or a loved one who might be showing signs of Alzheimer's, and again, or other dementias. We already talked about memory loss. Memory loss that disrupts daily life um, can be one of the first things we notice. And I had gone to an Alzheimer's conference this past March, and one of the women who spoke was actually diagnosed with the early stages, but she talked about sitting at lunch with a friend she had known all her life and kind of racking her brain to think, oh, what's her name? What's her name? What's her name? So that was one of the things that she noticed in her life that made her go and seek a diagnosis. It also creates challenges in planning or solving problems. Difficulty completing familiar tasks. If you could always make a certain recipe and now you can't make it anymore, something to be concerned about. If, for example, you always balance your checkbook down to the last penny and now you're having trouble with that, that's something to be concerned about. If you never balance your checkbook and you kind of don't keep track of your money, well, then that's who you are. So there's nothing to be concerned about, right? Because it's nothing different. Confusion with time or place is very common. And as a matter of fact, doctors will ask when you go in for a screening, they'll want to know if you've had any trouble remembering. They'll ask you, what is the time? What is the date? Where are we? Because confusion with time and place is one of the things that they're looking for. Trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships is one that surprised me. But again, because the brain cells are dying, that can be one of the things that happens. New problems with words. Okay. We sometimes all kind of grasp for a word that we can't remember, but typically we'll remember it at some point, or at least be able to Google what we're looking for to find out, right? But if you really are having trouble, and it's a big enough to impact your daily life with those words, that's something to be concerned about. Misplacing things, and here's the thing, losing the ability to retrace steps. So it's not, I don't know where my put my keys, but it's, I really don't even have a way of looking for my keys. I don't have that ability anymore to find what I put down. Decreased or poor judgment can also happen. You'll have people who are sometimes, maybe using bad words that they never used before because the judgment goes down a little bit. Withdrawal, it is a disease of communication as well, right? I'm going to find it hard to communicate with you if I have the disease. So that's going to make me withdrawal. And the same changes in mood and personality. Very often people become agitated, they become upset with the disease. And, again, all these symptoms, your brain cells that aren't working the way they should, confusion with time and place would certainly affect your mood and personality. So it is important to, uh, if you have any of these symptoms, to go see a doctor and find out if there is anything that you need to be concerned about, or to bring your loved one if you notice problems with that person. So if we kind of look at the progression of
Five,
how the
seven,
disease.
6, 5. If you wish to be called back at this number, press 1 or press.
So if you look at how the disease is diagnosed, years and years ago, it could only be diagnosed upon autopsy. They could look at the brain once a person passed away if an autopsy was performed, and they could see this degeneration in the brain, these plaques and tangles if the person has Alzheimer's. Since then, we've had so many more advances in being able to do MRI imaging, for example, where someone can get really, they can see it on the image. Just very recently, there is also what we call a blood biomarker test that they could sell in someone's blood if they have the disease. So this is kind of it's a moment where we really can say with an easy test if someone has Alzheimer's, it actually detects the protein plaques in the blood. However, right now we have to get Congress, there's a bill called the ASAP bill, ASAP, that we're trying to get Congress to approve it for everyone just as a screening. So right now, if someone is being diagnosed, they're already having memory issues, they can go and the doctor might prescribe this test. But it's not covered yet just for you or I or anyone who doesn't have any symptoms, but kind of wants to know, is my brain already building up this protein? Because it can happen years before there are any symptoms. So we really want to be sure that eventually Congress passes this ASAP bill and we are all able to just get a screening and know because there are medicines now that can help. So early detection is more important than it ever has been. And here are some of the treatments that are available now. And you may have seen, if you're a television watcher, there are some ads for some of these on TV that you will see as well. So, new treatments are available that slow disease progression for those in the earliest stages. So, those are some of them that you will see commercials for on television that actually slow the progress. But notice it says in the earliest stages. So, with someone who has advanced Alzheimer's, this is not going to help. It's approved for those people who are in the early stages. There are also drug options for people of all stages that help with symptoms. So they can help with the memory loss, they can help with the confusion. But I also want to, here's kind of the disclaimer at the bottom. Everyone experiences these um, these drugs differently in their body, right? So you may hear of a drug who works wonderfully for one person, and then your loved one tries it, it doesn't work as well because everyone's makeup is a little bit different, and they're not going to be as effective for everyone. All right, I'm going to stop and take a break for a second to ask if anything has come through in the chat yet. I don't see anything. Okay. Anyone want to, we don't have that many participants. If anyone has a question or comment at this time and you want to come off mute, that would
Hi,
be fine. Hi. Mhm.
thank you for the information. I have a family history of dementia,
Mhm.
so I just want to know, like, as a mid-aged woman, like, what are the things that are most effective to do?
Oh, okay. Thank you. So, I think you kind of asked at the perfect time of the presentation, just when we're talking about brain health. Um, so first of all, anything that they say is good for your heart is also good for your brain. So eating right. One of the diets that's recommended is called the Mind Diet, if you want to look for it. But it's really very similar to a Mediterranean diet. So it's, fruits and vegetables, lean meats, good oils like olive oil, as well, nuts, that kind of thing. So and then exercise, right? We all know we need to exercise. That's another thing that we can do. Keep our weight in check. So healthy living really can help. And I think I have on the next slide. Yes. This is actually they finally actually really did a longitudinal study where they looked at all of this, and it was called the Pointer study, and this is the recipe that they gave. So 30 to 35 minutes of moderate to intense aerobic activity 4 times a week. So really getting out there and whatever works for you. If it's the elliptical, if it's the treadmill, if it's taking a walk in your neighborhood, if you're a runner, anything that is 30 to 35 minutes of moderate to intense aerobic activity 4 times a week. Plus, add in some strength and flexibility exercises twice a week. So whether it be yoga or like I have an app on my phone that's called Fit On, that's a free app that has different activities, with weights or just doing some free weights kind of thing. So that's the physical activity. Health monitoring. So regular checkups. If you're prone to high blood pressure, um, keeping that in check as much as you can, keeping your weight in check as much as you can, and then your lab results, making sure your cholesterol's okay, all of those things that they check when they check your blood. So making sure that you're monitoring your health. Nutrition, we kind of already talked about. That's the Mind Diet. Again, they sell the book on Amazon if you're interested, but it's also very similar to a Mediterranean diet. So whole grains, olive oil, fish, limiting those things like sugar and unhealthy fats. And then this is very interesting, cognitive exercise. So they used for this study an app called Brain HQ, which I also downloaded because I was like, I also have family history. So I'm like, I got to do all the things. But cognitive exercise plus regular engagement in other intellectually challenging and social activities. So the worst thing you can do for your brain is really kind of stop communicating, right? So if you're retired like I am, well, you guys aren't because you're part of a work group here. But when you retire, keeping your brain challenged. So that's one of the reasons I do this. You want to stretch your brain. So they say hard is good, right? Um, Now I live on Long Island, so we get the newspaper Newsday, and Monday's crossword puzzle is easy, and it gets more challenging throughout the week. So don't stop at Monday. Try the Friday puzzle, try the Sunday puzzle. As much as you can create those new brain pathways or keep the ones going that are already there. And, I think about what we do, all of us naturally with babies when we kind of smile at them and look at their little faces, we're helping them build those neural pathways. Well, we got to keep those going. Um, so the more you can engage your brain, the better. Here's the interesting thing about this whole study as well. Um, there was a self-guided group and a structured group. So the structured group, they they really did a structured schedule with all these things. And they made considerable cognitive gains. But here's the good news. The self-guided group who just tried doing this all on their own, so they weren't as rigid in the way they followed it, they still made gains. So the message is, sometimes we all engage in this all or nothing kind of thinking, like, "Oh, I didn't have time to exercise today, so oops, there goes today." Instead of maybe doing a 10-minute quick thing that day because that's all I have time for. Um, the good news is that the people who did their self-guided also made gains. So whatever we do, in any of these realms that you're seeing here on the screen is important to keep our brains going. And it really does make a difference. And this is the first study that actually quantified that. So we know it makes a difference. So I hope I answered your question. Anyone else have a question at this point? Okay, we'll continue. So here are what we call the 10 healthy habits. And actually, the Alzheimer's Association does a whole presentation that just focuses on these. So some of them we've talked about already. But if I kind of go Um, from eating right, we talked about, right? If you have diabetes, managing diabetes or managing your blood sugar if you're pre-diabetic, so it doesn't become diabetes. So I have that in my family. I have the pre-diabetes. One thing that I learned was not to eat cereal in the morning. I love a good bowl of oatmeal, but I've switched it to eggs. So that protein in the morning is a really good way to keep your blood sugar stable throughout the day. Then maintain a healthy weight. I've struggled with this one my whole life. I do the best I can. But it's always a little above the older I get too. But maintain the best weight that you can. Sleep well. Again, easier some nights than others, but try to limit those distractions, limit the caffeine at the end of the day. Um, and the more it kind of goes with the get moving, because the more that we move during the day, the better we are sleeping in the evening. Now, I have an Apple Watch that reminds me to get up, right? Because they say sitting is bad, and it is sitting too much. So even if you're in an office working, if you get up every so often and just move about the room, move your arms, move your legs, that's helpful. Controlling your blood pressure, we talked about. Being smoke-free is, so good for everything, right? So if you're a smoker, trying to quit is important. Protecting your head. So bangs to the head actually can be kind of the catalyst for these symptoms of dementia. So we want to protect our heads as much as we can. Sometimes we're more concerned about the kids protecting their heads, putting on those helmets when they're riding the bicycles and all that. We have to think about our heads as well. Challenge your mind. Okay, we talked about this a little bit. But this one is interesting. Stay in school is actually a separate category because research has shown that the more years you're actually in a formal education setting, the better for your brain. It actually builds up a cognitive reserve. So stay in school. Those continuing education credits are actually not only, good for other things, but they're good for your brain as well. So the Alzheimer's Association, as I mentioned before, doesn't just do research and advocate for new laws, for example, but I had mentioned to you before that it also has a number that you can call. And this is a 24/7 helpline. So the number is on the screen. If you need it and you want to take a picture of the screen or a screenshot, or if you just want to wait for the slides to come to you, this 800 number you can call um, day or night. They have a variety of languages that they speak. So if you need to refer someone who doesn't speak English, that is fine. There will be someone to answer the call. Um, I use them, for example, when my dad was still with us and we needed more support, more home health care aides. They referred them to us. The great thing is, however, that not only can you get that information over the phone, you can actually say to them, I need a care consultation. And they will have a social worker contact you, meet with you at a local library or at a Zoom call and actually sit down with you and, discuss exactly what your family needs, what your specific needs are. So that's just a great support that you can make use of with the Alzheimer's Association. And I always say, the next bullet point that says free education and support. Yes, we have sessions like this. There are more online. There are more on the website, but for people who aren't techie, they can get a lot of that same website information from the 800 number. So you really have two different ways you can get that education. Trial Match is also, you access it through the the website, which is that alz.org, and it will put you in touch with various trials that you can either for you or for a loved one. So it's helping to aid that research. What's nice about it is that then you get some of kind of the cutting edge treatments. So they're always looking for people who are either diagnosed with various stages of the disease or people who have shown no symptoms, who want to be part of kind of the control group as they're doing their research. So trial match is always something open to you. In addition, other supports for you and for family members are available with the My ALZ Journey app. So this is a free app that you can download from the App Store on iPhone or Google Play on your Samsung. And it gives you personalized guidance. So it has two groups of users. One is people who are in the early stages of dementia, and the other is for caregivers, family members. So there's kind of built-in support. It also helps connect you to the Alzheimer's Association. So another great resource from the Alzheimer's Association. Um, if you have a loved one with dementia, joining in the walk is not just a way to raise funds, but it's truly just a great bonding experience. You'll see the different color flowers that people hold up either represent someone who has a loved one with disease, someone who has passed away from the disease, someone who's just there as a supporter for people. So it's a great way of bonding, kind of talking with other people who have experienced the same thing and having a lovely day outdoors. So consider the walk to end Alzheimer's. And then finally, other things that you can do. Just about anything, the Alzheimer's Association will help you make that into a fundraiser for Alzheimer's research. So some people play pickleball and people chip in money during the pickleball tournament or mahjong or golf or whatever it is that you do, crafting groups. It's called Do What You Love to End Alzheimer's. And again, you can find out more information about that from the website if you're interested in helping in that way with something that you actually love to do. So many different ways you can join the association, sharing your personal story as an advocate, helping your neighbors by providing education or support group. And if you yourself need a support group, there are many support groups available. You can find out on the website or by calling the 800 number. They're both in person and local communities, and there are Zoom support groups as well. Also on the website, there is a chat feature, and there are two of those as well for people with early onset who want to just kind of post, a question and get support from the community, or for people who are caregivers and want to do the same thing. So we had talked about clinical trials, um, fighting Alzheimer's through a fundraising activity of your choice on a day that works for you. And then again, this is the website, alz.org, where you can get more information. So I thank you for listening. I hope that the information was valuable to you, and I will again open it up for any more questions or just if you have anything that you think might help anyone else on the call.
And just stop the share, Diane.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share so I can see all of you. Great idea. Oh, it jumped. Here we go.
Cool.
Okay.
Now we got boxes. I think one of the things that's been very helpful for me is the support groups. I attend
Mhm.
one on Zoom. It's the second Friday, I think, and there's also one in person out where I live that I go to once a month. And I've learned more from the other people in those rooms um, than I probably could have on any webinar, because
Yep.
everybody's at a different place, a different stage, um,
Hmm.
in the process.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because, it's always a little different virtually, but when I do these sessions live, I learn so much from the people who attend, who are caregivers, of people who are fighting Alzheimer's and dementia. Yeah.
When we first had the idea to do this webinar, I was talking to the education people at Alzheimer's, and I was thinking about the fact that a lot of our families that we work with have Alzheimer's or dementia in the family,
Hmm.
either a grandparent or maybe even a parent, and that
Yep.
our kids that are sitting in front of us are dealing with from day to day, um, or some of their parents are what do they call it? They're in the sandwich generation where they're taking care of their
Yep.
kids, they're taking care of their kids, and they're taking care of their parents. And I was thinking about some of those kids that may be in that progress in that process that we don't really even know about. Um, but
Hmm.
I'm sure it's not
I'm
uncommon.
sure there are many of them, and as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about how much when my dad had the disease, he couldn't, he didn't know who my grandchildren were because, they were too new. He couldn't make those new memories, but he still got such joy out
Hmm.
of seeing them,
Hmm.
and I think about that with the students you work with, what they can do just by being there and talking to someone in their family who has the disease. And one piece of advice you can give the students is when they're talking to a grandparent or someone with the disease, don't say, hey, grandma, do you remember such and such? Because they don't remember it. Just say, hey, grandma, when I was 5, you took me to the zoo and we had a great day. Let me tell you about it again. So just eliminate the do you remember part of it and just tell them something from their life, like almost like a story. And, I know my dad would smile and say, oh, I didn't remember that, but he'd enjoy the telling. So they can be just a light for those people who are struggling with Alzheimer's and dementia. And they,
Hi.
yeah, go ahead, Melanie.
I was wondering if so my brother is dealing with a new kind of newish diagnosis
Mhm.
with his wife. And there's a lot of very, like everything has to be so quiet and we can't talk about it. And it's all so I was wondering as I speak to him and the rest of the family about this, what do you think would be the best way to invite him to participate in the types of things that you've discussed? Because he could benefit from just about anything right now.
Yeah. Um, so first of all, what you're saying is so true in so many families. We still kind of have a stigma about this disease and we don't want to talk about it. And people are embarrassed to say that they don't remember or that they're not there anymore. Um, I would just have him try some of it, just present it as, hey, here's what we're doing today. And present it that way. You know, it, even though they don't remember, so I struggled a lot because I mean, my mom is 96 now, but both my parents were the same age. So it was hard to get my mom to understand, certain things about the disease. So, for example, my dad went to Day Haven, which is a day program for people with dementia, and it was so good for him. Um, but she would say, it's not worth it. He doesn't remember it when he gets home anyway. And I'm like, yeah, but Ma, when he's there, he's getting a lot out of it. It doesn't matter if he remembers it when he gets home, but that was a hard nut to crack with her. But I think really just anything you think is good for him, just kind of plan it and say, hey, here's what we're doing and
Okay.
see how that goes. Yeah.
I like it. Okay, I like that approach. Thank you so much, Diane.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Anyone else?
I had two more questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So the first one was like people who do not have a predisposition, like
Mm.
statistically, more or less, do you know what's that age range where you should be looking for those mild signs, where you should start to like seek treatment, like what
Yeah.
the age range would be like?
So the majority of people who have these diseases are 65 years and older because your risk goes way up once you're 65 and older. So that's really when you're concerned about symptoms. Um,
Okay.
all of the good lung health and heart health should start like immediately.
Mhm.
Whatever you can do that. There are people who get early onset. It's not as common, thank goodness, but that people can get it at a much younger age. For the most part, that's a gene that they can really trace to that early onset. Most of us who are more predisposed because of our family, there are genes in there that say, they're not deterministic genes. They're genes that say you're more predisposed. Not that it will happen.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. And then the second question is people who have approached those later stages, right, where they have issues like, with saying inappropriate things and experiencing discomfort in day-to-day interactions. What are recommendations for them? I know you mentioned the care representative from the Alzheimer's Association.
Yes, yes.
Like,
So
are there any other like things or
yeah, so really be aware of what makes that person like use the inappropriate language. Or I mean, sometimes it's going to happen no matter what, but sometimes you can go back and trace kind of, oh, did that happen when it was really noisy in the room, because that disturbs the person. Did that happen when the person was in a new environment, and that disturbed them and made those behaviors come out? There's also something called sunsetting, which many people with Alzheimer's and dementia become more agitated in the evening. It's not known 100% why that happens. Having raised children and helped with my grandchildren, I know that babies get fussy in the evening too. I don't know why it is, but be aware of evening times, for example, that's not a good time for something new or something different. Um, you know, sometimes you can trace agitation even to something like the person needs to use the restroom and can't express it. The person has, a tag that's bothering their clothing and they can't express it. So always remembering that it's a disease that affects communication greatly. And if you can kind of work with them enough to find out what it is that's bothering the person, you can help it not happen the next time.
And let me just add,
Yeah.
it's almost like when we're working with kids, we're trying to chase down the reason that that kid is having that problem at that moment in time. And every Alzheimer's sufferer is different. My wife is very calm. Um, she doesn't do the yelling out. I probably should knock on wood. But she's not that person. On the other hand, she can't communicate in any way. She can't speak in
Mhm.
any way. But she watches things go by, but she doesn't get upset or angry, which, knowing her for a while, kind of surprises me. But she was, and this happens sometimes too. She self-identified. She went to her doctor. She was probably in her early 60s, 65, and she said to her doctor, "I'm losing my mind. Something's going on." And
Yeah.
her doc sent her to a neurologist. They ran a bunch of tests, and something was indeed going on.
Mhm.
And and so that's where we are. But um, you hear, I recommend that if you're in this situation, one of the things, the support groups are great. They have one at Dayhaven. Um,
Yeah.
my wife used to actually go to Dayhaven 1 or 2 days a week, a couple years ago. So um, there's a lot of support out there. Um,
Yep. Was it the one in Ronkonkoma?
yeah,
Yeah, she was probably there when my dad was there.
yeah,
Yeah.
she probably was. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a
Um,
great program.
it is. It's a
There's a
wonderful.
little kid daycare at the
Yeah,
other end of the building, and they bring the little kids up to hang out with the older people sometimes, and the old people love it. It's
yeah,
great.
yeah, they
Yeah,
do. Yeah. Um, it just making me remember as well, music is great
yeah.
for anyone. I used to tell I'm just going to call her our device because if not, she'll start answering me. But I used to say, just play music from the 1940s because that was my dad's era.
Yeah,
And there would be songs, he couldn't remember most things. And there was a patriotic song day, and he's singing, "You're a grand old flag." And I'm like, where'd this come from? So, music is a great way to reach people. Um, I talked to someone once who goes to various facilities and plays the guitars and sing, and she said there was a woman there who was completely non-communicative, and she sang, and the woman just smiled at her and said, "Nice," So it was like the first word she had said in forever.
yeah.
So music is a great way to reach people.
So yes, we'll send this slideshow to you as well as a link to the recording, um, as well, and we'll send it to you as well as the people who weren't able to make the meeting. Um, and for no extra charge, we'll send you a certificate of attendance because you actually showed up today. Any more questions?
Have one more question. I don't know
Okay,
if I
Anna.
missed out. It's about my aunt was diagnosed at the beginning with dementia, but now it's called as Alzheimer.
So, what probably happened because dementia is the more broad general term, they probably first said, "Hey, it's dementia." But then, as they did more testing, they found out what kind of dementia it is. And it turned out to be Alzheimer's because Alzheimer's is one of the kinds of dementia.
It is the step like you get dementia first and then Alzheimer. That's the way it goes.
No, it's just so if you think of it this way, like if someone has heart disease, right? That's kind of the general term. So you can say like, what kind of heart disease do you have? Well, I have angina, or well, I have a blockage in one of my arteries, right? Those are all different kinds of heart disease. Same is true with dementia. Dementia is if someone says I have dementia, you can say, well, what kind of dementia? You have Alzheimer's or you have vascular. So they're all called dementia.
Thank you. It runs in my family very badly. And
Yeah,
a
I'm
lot.
sorry. It
I
runs in
have
mine
an aunt
too.
that's been living with dementia 11 years. At this point, she not chewing and she's in bed. She's being feed with soft food.
Yeah.
She been with us with 11 years with that. With a,
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's hard. It's hard. And food does become an issue. People kind of have trouble swallowing um as the disease progresses. Yeah. So all the
thank
best
you.
with your aunt. Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Anna.
Anyone
Any?
else with a question before we
I don't
close?
have a question. I just wanted to say thank you for the resources. There are times when I talk to students and they'll mention that their grandparent had it, and they have sometimes that their grandparent was violent,
Mm,
and my mother was violent, and it necessitated a nursing home. I mean, hers was a little different because she had schizophrenia and then got dementia, which was very bad, but
sure.
a lot of times what happens is that their dementia is so bad that they run after people with knives and everything, and I've talked to students like that, so it's good to hear. I mean, I knew about the Alzheimer's .org. I actually followed them on LinkedIn, but I didn't realize there was social work support. So had I mean, I had a social worker that was working with me, but that's
Sure.
a
But yeah.
good resource. So I
Hmm.
appreciate that. I
Good.
I thought I knew a lot, and then I come to this and I'm like, wow. So that
Learn
was
something else. Okay, good.
super awesome to hear. I'll talk to students that I work with. They're struggling. Some of them
Sure.
live with their grandparent who has Alzheimer's and their extended family. They live with a large
Right.
family and it's difficult. So
Absolutely, it
yeah.
is. Yeah. Okay.
It's appreciated.
I'm glad
Thank
it
you.
was helpful. Sure.
Thank
Good.
you.
So I think I know the answer, but so the website is Alzheimer's dot whatever,
Org.
and
Yep.
yeah, and does it link people to where they are geographically? Because there's lots of people on this meeting who aren't on Long Island or New York City. Um, so are there? I know that the group I deal with mostly is on Long Island, but
Hmm.
are there groups in other parts of the state?
There are,
Okay,
yes,
cool. Okay,
yes. There are local branches everywhere. Yeah.
okay,
So they can link you to someone who's in your
perfect,
area. Yep.
perfect. All right. Yes, we will send the PowerPoint out as well as a link to the recording. And let me just put up the next commercial announcement. So thanks, Diane, for your
You're
presentation.
welcome.
Our next webinar is this Thursday. If you haven't signed up, you're one of the 500 people who have it. Um, so the next is on NICEAD graduation requirements, and it's this Thursday. It's also always a very popular one. And then we're planning our programs for next fall when school starts again. Also, need to mention that our conference is November 11th through 13th at Turning Stone in Syracuse area. So without any further questions, thanks again, Diane, and thanks
Welcome.
for attending today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Sure.